Welcome to ShaheenSarani.com. Today we're going to talk about playtesting, one of the integral parts of becoming a professional Magic player, or at least a Magic player that is trying to aim high, trying to win those tournaments, trying to top 8 those opens, trying to win those PTQs, trying to just make a name for himself or herself. And this is the way you do it. You got to playtest. So the first step is download MTGO. And if you don't really have the funds for it, or you're just trying to save a little money, then you have Cockatrice, and there's a few other free programs that you can playtest digitally, because playtesting is something where not everybody has time to get with a group of friends and then run the gauntlet. We're going to talk about the gauntlet coming up, but the first thing we want to talk about is just the digital aspect. You can build these decks online. There are free programs you can use. There's paid programs, which I use as MTGO, and honestly, the initial investment in MTGO building a deck is a little pricey, but with playtests, with playtesting, with playing online, with actually seeing those results go into the real world and doing well in one of these tournaments that you play in, just a couple even weekend tournaments at your local game store, you'll be able to recoup those losses, and it's just magic at your fingertips. So I highly suggest MTGO, but there are free alternatives, so that's something you can look into. Once you get that deck built on one of these online programs, it's all about playing against the real stuff. Stay out of the casual rooms, get with a friend who has the program as well, and just play known deck against your deck. I want you to be original. I'm an original guy. Anybody who's followed me throughout my professional career has seen me play decks like 22, which was a mass polymorph deck at Pro Tour Paris in 2011, where I did pretty well with it, and it's kind of funny. But it was powerful and it's original. Blink Riders, Greater Gifts, which Frank Carson adopted and they got second at Worlds with. These are decks that I made that were just, kind of different, outside the box. So you don't have to play a net deck. Don't ever get that into your mentality. Don't say, well, I need to play a real deck to win. You need to play a deck that has powerful cards, and being original is fine, but you need to be able to beat the real decks, the online decks, the decks that perform well with your deck. And the only way you can know that is by playtesting. So download the program, MTGO or another free online program, get your deck built, and then start playing. While you're playing, get a pen, get some paper, take notes. Find out where you're weak against. What cards are you losing to? What strategies are difficult for you to beat? I instantly thought of Infinite Obliteration when I could not beat the Green Eldrazi deck at the beginning of the set. So once that came out, put Infinite Obliteration in, beat it many, many times. Still lost it once in a while, but my numbers went up. And the only way you can realize that, the only way you can figure that out is by playtesting. Otherwise, you'll just assume it's bad, assume it's good, and you won't find out until you've already wasted your money on your open entrance. So you want to be able to have that information laid out prior to you starting the tournament. Gauntlet making. This is something that we do here in Hampton Roads. You build all the decks. Don't be afraid of proxying. Get a bunch of commons on the back of those cards, proxy up those decks. If you have one good friend that plays Magic, get with that friend and run your deck through the gauntlet. 10 games with sideboard, 10 games without sideboard, and then start taking notes. Where are you weak against? What cards were good against what matchups? And that'll have you build the perfect sideboard. So when you go to the Open, you know everybody. Here's the benefit of an Open or a PTQ or a Pro Tour or anything. The way the world works now is different than it used to be. Before, you don't know what you're going to play against. But now with the internet, now with MTGO, now with all this deck database and SCG articles and strategy articles, the surprise factor of Magic is at an all-time low, which is fine. It's not something that's actually beneficial for us. With no surprise, when you play the weird deck, when you play that control deck, that fringe deck, you are at such an advantage from card choice where you can play whatever you want as long as with powerful cards, be prepared for everything else when no one's prepared for you. And that's how you perform well at a tournament with a control deck. So, building that gauntlet. Go through the tier 1 decks from the articles. Go through the Open Series finishers, high finishers. Go through MTGO daily 4-0 list. Proxy those decks up and then play against them. Start developing percentages. Well, if you're 70% against deck A, you don't need a lot of sideboard for that. 30% against deck B, you need a lot of sideboard for that. And you might have to change your deck around. If you're only beating Abzan 30% of the time, then you know Abzan is going to be a super popular deck on the Open Series. So you really need to go back into the lab, cut some cards and make your main deck better and then do well. If you're 55% against it, 60% against it, then you can focus on the sideboard, helping to polish that matchup a little bit more. And that's all from playtesting. That is all from figuring out what decks you're weak against. And not all of us have the time to play all these matches all the time. Okay, and that's why online programs are probably the best bet. But the actual handmade gauntlet of the decks is even better because you get to choose what you play against. You get to do it live, because when you're doing it online, you're not used to the triggers, you're not used to card interactions. MTGO is doing it for you, so there's a lot more skill building when you do it in person with the gauntlet. But if one is better than the other, but both are good, both are ways to be successful in the Open Series. Trust me. Look at those results, find the tier 1 decks, find the tier 2 decks, proxy them up, get with a couple friends, play tests, and when you go to that Open Series, you're going to just wow yourself on how well you're performing against these top tier decks. You're beating known players that might take the playtesting for granted. You are so prepared that you've top 8'd your first Open, or you're continuously being successful, that it's going to yield great rewards for you. So playtesting is huge. The last benefit of it is perfecting the mana base. Even if you don't have time for playtesting, Gauntlet. You don't have time for MTGO. You have time to goldfish your deck. I goldfish all the time. I'm doing my writing a paper for school, or I'm developing some lesson plans for the kids at school, or whatever I'm doing at home, and I'm goldfishing my Esper Dragons deck. And when I do that, the one thing you gain from that is mana-based perfection. I will know exactly how often, based on the amount of I'm goldfishing, to say black on 2 or blue black on 3, and you can figure out your mana base that way as well. There's a scientific method to it, and I've had Frank Carson, a friend of mine, and you all know him as well, actually help me with the mana base here and there, breaking down the numbers. But if you play it over and over and over, repetition, and then seeing how your mana unfolds, you can do it that way as well, or that way to strengthen it as well. So these things all in conjunction will yield you higher results. It'll help you win, and you'll be able to be well prepared for the field. And this is something that is vital for anyone who wants to have their first success or to build on prior success to do even better. Thank you for watching, and see you guys next time.
Okay, you want to go straight to the next one?
Yeah.
I'll just roll, and then I'll just cut them in.
Sounds good. Okay.
Whenever you're ready.
Welcome to ShaheenSarani.com. We're going to talk about Eternal deck building. So Eternal is formats of the olden times. Modern, Legacy, Vintage. We're going to nix Vintage, though, and it's not because I'm not a fan of Vintage or have something against Vintage players or the deck building process. I'm just not very familiar with it. I've never actually had access to Power. I've never been interested in learning Vintage because it's not a tournament-ready deck. It's not a tournament-ready format. So you'll see that you're not going to see any Vintage from me. So let's talk about Legacy and Modern. Many of you guys have followed me for a while, and you know that my Legacy track record is pretty good. 5 invitational top 8s in a row on the back of Legacy being half the format. And that is from good old Esper Stoneblade. Esper Stoneblade is the definition of a 50-50 deck. Against every deck, you have game. If it's Reanimator, if it's Sneak and Show, if it's Death and Taxes, if it's Jeskai, Stoneblade, if it's Teamer, Delver, whatever it is, you are 50-50 with no skill weighed in. Being decent at the game, being experienced at the game, understanding the format, as if you look at my playtesting video, you'll see where I get my experience from. I give myself a few more percentage points, and that's where I am. That's where I'm going with this video with you. I'm going to help you develop a deck in Modern or Legacy with a control theme in mind, and I'm going to help you, give you a few tips to say, how can we make this win a little bit more? I'm going to be here for you. Let's talk about it right now. Legacy and Modern are formats where you need to go with power over consistency. Cards like Force of Will is a powerful card. Sword to Plowshares, Snapcaster Mage. My decks in Legacy, when you draw an opening hand of Stoneblade, you'll see that there's no real great hand. I'm not going to turn one kill you, but all these cards are super powerful, and even though I might draw my wrong half of my deck against matchup A or B, you need to have 4 sword in your deck. You need to have maximum Force of Wills. You need to have a ton of Snapcaster Mages, Brainstorms. These are cards that are super powerful that have to be in your list. You can play a lot of variations of Stoneblade with success. I've seen Jeskai Stoneblade do alright. I've seen him just straight blue-white. You look at Ben Friedman, he's put up some good numbers with blue-white Stoneblade. The reason why I'm playing Esper Stoneblade is for power. Power in Thoughtseize. Power in Black Hand Disruption. Power in Black Sideboard cards. So I'm going way into the power level over consistency, because blue-white Stoneblade has a lot of the same advantages, but when you add the black, you get that power level, and you need to, because in this format, you have people putting in Grizzlebrand super cheap. You have people putting in Emrakul from a show and tell. You have people storming out on you turn 3, turn 2 sometimes. So you really need to have power in your Stoneforge Mystic deck, because you're honestly playing a 1-2 Squire on turn 2 just to get a Battle Skull eventually. It's not flashy. It's not super efficient in such an older format, but with the power of Thoughtseize, Force of Will, and really powerful blue card draw, these cards all gain power. Stop your opponent, Stoneforge Mystic, close the game out. It's a great strategy. I have had winning record after winning record, thousands of dollars, into the coffers thanks to Legacy. And it's not because I'm just the most renowned Legacy player in the world. It's not because Stoneforge Mystic is super powerful. It's because the deck is built in a way, thanks a little bit to Tom Martell for doing well at a Grand Prix before that, where you take advantage of power and you have just enough interactive cards to beat your opponent. So let's go with a few cards in Legacy that you can't do without. Sword to Plowshare is a must in a control deck in Legacy. You can look at Miracles, which has 4 Sword to Plowshare in it. Force of Will, Miracles, Stoneforge Mystic decks all have maximum amount of these as well. Snapcaster Mages, both these decks have them. So there's a few prerequisites like Brainstorm and the cards I just mentioned that have to be in your blue deck and in your white deck to play control deck in Legacy, because you have to have the most powerful cards, otherwise you're going to be at a huge disadvantage. So make sure you don't leave without these. Whenever you're building a control deck in Legacy, you also need to take the format into heavy consideration. There are 30 decks in Legacy, but only 4 or 5 that are super powerful enough to where you have to make your main deck beat them. You have the Delver decks, which means you have to be prepared for early pressure and burn and an excessive amount of stifles and wastelands. You know you're going to play that deck in an open. You know you're going to play that deck at a Grand Prix. So when you're playing Legacy, make sure your main deck is prepared to beat the wasteland strategy. You got to beat that strategy. The second thing, another deck in Legacy you got to be prepared for is the combo deck. Their show and tell will be there. Omnitel is going to be there. Decks that put in Grizzlebrand and or Emrakul for a really cheap price or sneaking into play, that's going to be there. So you need to have your Containment Priest ready. You need to have your heavy counterspell and hand disruption ready. You need to be able to prepare yourself to deal with these big threats, because you're just putting in a Stoneforge Mystic. So if you're doing something as weak as this, you need to make sure that your supporting cast can handle that. So make sure when you're building a control deck that you're able to answer these threats as well. And the last thing, you're going to play a mirror style control situation. You might play against Miracles or the Stoneblade Mirror, or you might play against Grixis. You might play, there's a lot of these variations that do kind of the same thing, where they have powerful spells like you, and it's going to be kind of a tit for tat thing. You need to be able to, you're equipped with the right responses. There are fringe decks on the outside like lands as well that you need to be prepared for, and that's why that's where playtesting comes into play. I was 10% against that deck, could never beat it, and then it dawned upon me, Telemis performance. And now, when I played against it the last 3 times, I beat it all 3 times. It got me into the last Open top 8 last year, just based on a 5-mana sorcery, because it's the only thing you could do. Sometimes when you can't beat a deck, never say, well, that's it, can't beat it. You need to go to the lab, look at the Gatherer, find a card that can answer it, put it in your deck. Telemis Performance is a perfect example of a card that sounds silly, and for those who don't know what it does, it's a 5-mana sorcery. They flip cards from the top of their deck till they hit a creature, and if you don't have a creature, and then you get that creature. And if they don't have one, which lands doesn't, automatically kills them. So you kind of just play this game. You're playing your fetch lands. You're not really fetching. You're getting basics. You're brainstorming, and then dead. And that's something that you have to do. And now, thanks to that one switch, because of deck building and play testing, I've been able to make the top 8 of an open and do pretty well against the deck historically now. All right, so you have determining the metagame, play the best cards from those colors. And it's not, in Legacy, these cards aren't going to change. If we had filmed this 5 years from now, I'm going to tell you to play Sword of Plowshare. You're going to play Force of Will. You're still going to play Snapcaster Mage. So these are the cards that have to be in your deck, and there's no leeway for that. All right, let's talk about Modern a little bit. So Legacy is kind of a done deal. It's a format that doesn't really change a whole lot. I played the same archetype over and over, and have done well because no one's going to spend $5,000 to build the next best Legacy deck. So if you're going to a tournament and open on the East Coast, people are going to play what they have. If you have an elf deck built, you're not going to spend $3,000 to build, Team or Delver. It's just not going to happen. So the format is not stale, but everybody has a deck, or maybe a second deck, and those are going to be the ones that are in your metagame. That's just the way it pans out. Modern is not the same way. Modern right now, and we're not going to turn this video into a rant that I usually do about what cards should be banned, but currently as we're filming, the Pro Tour is going on, and Eldrazi's everywhere. So you need to be able to beat these decks. And you have a Modern format where control is dead, and there's no control archetype that's successful. They kind of took away Splinter Twin, which kind of killed that whole color combination of blue, red, black, or blue, red, white with that combo kill. So when you build a control deck in there, here's going to be the new strategy. And this is something that I've been working on kind of behind the scenes. And I'm going to release this list for you guys on Shaheen Sarani Facebook personality page. So when you go to that page, you'll see it listed there for you. You're going to have to play cards that are not just good in Modern, but that are good in Legacy. So let's go back. If you have Sword to Plowshare in Legacy, what's the next best thing in Modern? Path to Exile. Snapcaster Mage in Legacy, it's legal in Modern. You got Snapcaster Mage. You have Counterspell in Legacy, not legal. Mana Leak's not a bad switch there. So you have Mana Leak. And when you can build a Legacy or a Modern control deck based on Legacy power. So that at the end of the day, I came up with this Jeskai control deck. It's got a lot of the elements of Legacy. You don't have Brainstorm, you have Serum Visions to help you hit land drops. But you have all these other cards, Lightning Bolt, good in Legacy, good in Modern. And by using this kind of line here where you have Legacy here and see what cards kind of leak into Modern, you can build a good Modern control deck based on what is successful in Legacy. So when you're building a deck, see what cards kind of go in both situations, and that's a good way to build a good Modern control deck. Right now, like I said, Modern doesn't have a control archetype that's being successful. And it's in part due to certain cards that are legal that shouldn't be legal. It's in part due to a new Eldrazi menace. They kind of banned cards that are staples in the control world, like Stoneforge Mystic, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Ancestral Visions, now Splinter Twin, which gave kind of a control with a combo kill. So with these cards gone, it's time for a new era. We got to start from scratch. And the best way to start from scratch is by using this strategy of taking Legacy cards that are Modern legal and building a Modern deck around it and play testing. So when you go home today or at home right now watching this video, start building a deck with Snapcaster Mages, Path to Exiles. You want to go the blue-white route. If you want to go blue-black, same thing. Build with Dismembers, go for the Throats, have Jace Vryn's Prodigy, Inquisition Thoughtseeds. Just play cards that are good in both formats, and then we should be able to have some success. Right now with this Jeskai deck I have that you'll see, I am great against the aggro decks, which includes Infect, Affinity, Zoo, Burn, whatever have you, and medium against the Eldrazi decks. So this is a good step. This is a step in the right direction. You want to play a deck that is good against the aggro decks because right now Modern is 80% aggro. Everybody's playing these blitz aggressive strategies or Eldrazi. And when you have a format as kind of narrow and linear as this, it should be easy to build a deck around to beat these decks. Don't let the power of Eldrazi sway you from playing a good Modern deck. As long as you can beat it half the time, play cards like Crumble to Dust in your board. Play cards that like Supreme Verdict, which is fantastic against these decks. Just wrath them away. And with a little bit of luck, some good play, and good sideboarding, we can beat these Eldrazi decks. So, The strategy for these two formats is power over consistency. Look for the powerful cards that go into both formats, build control decks like that from the ground up, and you'll be successful in these Eternal formats. Please watch the video on playtesting and watch the video on how to build a good control deck using the 10 steps to help enhance your abilities in these Eternal formats. But I hope this video was helpful to you, and I hope that you'll have success in the Open Series, Grand Prix, or whatever tournaments in your future. Thanks for watching.